one of the things that I've found helpful is to try to understand the difference between what they're asking for and the information I'll need.
For sure.
Right. And that
100%. Give me an example to respond to. Like, give me something that somebody might ask.
I had a gig. The guy kept demanding Gantt charts, and all I was able to say was, we have burn down charts. And it took me a couple of weeks to figure out, well, he can't use a burn down chart. He doesn't want to learn how to read it. It doesn't answer his questions. So I started to ask him, like, well, who asks you about the project, or what information do you need to make what kind of choices? Because I was able to come up with reports that would take the output of a Scrum team, give them to a waterfall executive in a way that he could consume them and make choices from that information. Welcome to Leading Agile Sound Notes. I'm Dave Pryor. I'm here with Mike Kottmeyer. Mike, thanks for making time at the end of your Friday afternoon.
Happy to do it, man. What a way to go into the weekend. Get to talk to you.
And we're going to talk about something that came up on a call the other day that I was really excited to hear this conversation happen and to know that this is something that we're doing. It's something that I used to do a long time ago, but not with this level of rigor. And we're going to explore, I don't know, what are you calling it? How are you referring to it?
Well, let me give a little bit of backstory. So what we're talking about is in the space of like stakeholder management, right? And you know, I think we all fall into this category sometimes, you know, whether I'm a consultant or whether I'm embedded in a company. And it's like we can see so clearly the change that needs to be made. And when we go out and we try to share that change with other people, we get met with resistance. And there's a lot of like pejorative kind of things that will throw at people. And like in the Agile community, oh, that leader's too command and control, or like that's the big one, all right? Or they're resistant to change, right? We kind of throw these ad hominem kind of attacks at them. And what I find is that most people in companies like aren't evil, right? They're not resisting change for no reason. And so one of the things that I think about a lot is when I have somebody who's resistant to change or can't see the vision of what I want to do, like I ask myself, it's like, what are their goals? What are they trying to accomplish? What do they see that I don't see? Yeah. Or what can't they see that I do see? You know, we ask ourselves the question a lot is like, what does that person believe about the situation they're in? Yep. What do they value? And so, you know, over the last couple of years, you know, as I've run Leading Agile and, you know, we have people come and go and clients come and go. I was just working with a lot of the teams and I was just thinking about the idea that you know, maybe formalize some stakeholder management kinds of things in a way that builds that empathy perspective into our models a little bit, and you know, and really start from a place of generosity with people in organizations. Yeah. And so it's like, you know, the classic example in our world is you'll have a development organization that wants to move to Agile, and you'll have a PMO organization or a team of executives that are trying to do historical earned value or red, green, yellow status reporting or something. And a lot of times as practitioners, we can fall into the trap of saying, well, we're Agile, you don't need that. You come to the team room or you look in Jira or you see a burn down or whatever. And especially in an early stage transformation where you have dependencies and org structure problems and the inability to produce a working test increment, it's like that strips a layer of safety off. Yeah. So one of the things we've been doing across a lot of our accounts is going through org charts and key stakeholders and going, you know, and again, it's just stuff we've been doing for a long time. It's like what we got taught as project managers 20 years ago. Yeah. And it's really it's stakeholder management, but doing it in a very structured and disciplined way that focuses on having empathy for all the players first, and trying to help everybody, and I mean everybody, win as a result of the transformation. Yeah. Right? We don't want to find ourselves in a situation and again, whether us as consultants or people that are in companies, we don't want to make a bunch of enemies, right? I mean, ideally, everybody wins. Everybody keeps their job. Everybody figures out how to be successful. And there's a lot of stuff in in an agile world, especially in early stage agile transformation, where there's certain things we can do to help people win. And what we hope is, like, if we have to build a construct in an organization to get an executive a report or to get a PMO, some sort of status, the idea is to get them what they need in a healthy way, a way that's consistent with agile values and principles and practices and operating models, and help the organization see over time that maybe they don't need as much of that, perceived control as they did, So that was the space of the conversation we were having.
Can I ask some questions now?
Yeah, please. I'll go on forever.
I was trying to find a way in.
I know. So, I could talk on this for days.
Just for that last point, like, one of the things that I've found helpful is to try to understand the difference between what they're asking for and the informational need.
For sure.
Right? And that
100%. Give me an example to respond to. Like, give me something that somebody might ask.
I had a gig. The guy kept demanding Gantt charts, and all I was able to say was, we have burn down charts. And it took me a couple weeks to figure out, well, he can't use a burn down chart. He doesn't want to learn how to read it. It doesn't answer his questions. So I started to ask him, like, well, who asks you about the project, or what information do you need to make what kind of choices? Because I was able to come up with reports that would take the output of a Scrum team, give them to a waterfall executive in a way that he could consume them and make choices from that information.
Yeah, for sure. My early revs of this stuff were probably 20 years ago now at this point. I was working in a PMO at a company here in Atlanta, and we were doing some crazy things. Hundreds of people doing Scrum, kind of operating within a RUP framework. That was when we invented a lot of our program and portfolio management, investment tier level governance things. And at the end of the day, the finance group, corporate audit and controls, the executives, they're stewards of the organization's money. And the organization is making large investments, hundreds of people. And at least in the model, the way it is today, they have fiduciary responsibility to deliver the expected value for that revenue. And so what they kind of want to see, it's really like rudimentary earned value. It's like, we want to understand, have we, for the amount of time that we've spent, are we burning money at the right rate?
Yeah. For
the amount of money that we've burned, have we made sufficient progress through the backlog? And it's what's hard is that as an agilist, we inherently know that requirements change. And we inherently know that, there's a lot of planning that is waste. And so I always go back to, like, the last PMBOK I read was PMBOK 3. So I might be out of date at this point.
Bit out of date.
A little bit out of date. What are we up to now? How many PMBOKs do we have?
I don't know. I got them all back.
Oh, wow. Gosh. Wow. Yeah. It's been
at least seven. At least seven.
But we still talk about rolling wave planning and progressive elaboration, I would imagine, right? And so, like, it's reasonable to say that, we have this roadmap for the engagement. This is how we think the project's going to play out at a certain level of abstraction. This is kind of the sequence of release plans, where we'd like to be in market. But we know that for the next release or two, we have more fidelity and specificity to that than we do for stuff that's a year out.
Yeah.
Got it? And we know that at like a sprint or two or three ahead, we have even more specificity. For the current sprint, we should have a lot of specificity. And we can start to extrapolate through velocity at the team level, through throughput at the program and portfolio level, where we're at against release objectives. We have the ability, because of the way we decompose work, to make trade-offs, maybe at the user story level, and still deliver the capability that's in the epic. And so there's ways of telling that story that resonate with an executive to start, right? But sometimes we take like the extreme position where we go, well, we don't know everything, so we don't want to communicate anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of organizations that try to adopt Agile find themselves in a place where the teams are just operating sprint to sprint.
Yeah.
And that's untenable.
You can't run the
Like
business 2 weeks at a time.
Yeah, you can't fund millions of dollars and just say, hey, we delivered this sprint. And I had a situation a couple months ago where I was on the phone with this executive, and the organization wasn't at a sufficient level of maturity to really be able to deliver what he needed, mm-hmm. right? Tremendous amount of chaos, way too much in the backlog, technical debt, dependencies, understaffed. And so what the organization was doing with our support was starting to stabilize the system and be able to say, we could say like, these are the things we were working on and these were the things in the backlog, but it was very difficult to get like a longer view. Mm-hmm. And so the conversation was, it's reasonable for that executive to want that information.
Yeah.
It's reasonable, right? Because they have fiduciary responsibility to their stakeholders. But we can also be transparent about what we know and what we don't know. Mm-hmm. We can say that this 3-year-long initiative, it's budgeted for this. Right. This is the roadmap. This is how we think it's going to play out. And then as we deliver sprint to sprint or feature to feature, epic to epic, we can start to measure progress and we can start to communicate the trade-offs we're making. Yep. We can start to communicate that we're delivering slower than we expected or faster than we expected. And so getting back to the whole stakeholder management thing, it's like we have to respect that person in the state that they're in today mm-hmm. needs that information to be safe. And especially if the Agile teams or the groups of Agile teams, the programs or portfolios or whatever, if they haven't historically done a good job of being able to commit sprint to sprint or to deliver value release to release, there's not a lot of trust in the organization. Right. And so what starts to happen is when we get into this mindset of like, well, it's Agile in name only, or it's like what will happen is that the project managers will revert to the controls that they're familiar with, right? So it's our job as the change agents, or it's the Agilists in the organization's job to say, I hear you, and this is what we can produce now. And I'm telling you, it's like Agilists can out-earn value a traditional project plan, especially in software most of the time, right? Because we're being really real about progress. And so this conversation that we launched internally was, what can we do systematically with our clients and the ecosystem of stakeholders that we interact with? And we interact across the board. It's almost never just dev teams. And we have obviously product, business relationship management, infrastructure operations, security, the business side of things, the financial controls, right? In an early stage, what we want to do is we want to use Agile to build systems that get people to kind of relax and trust what it is we're doing.
Okay.
And then over time, as the system becomes trustworthy, we can educate the system on how they can exploit the new iterative and incremental delivery capacities, and maybe at some point start to change business strategy.
Okay.
Start to change how they go to market. Start to change how they meet commitments to their customers. That was why the whole Basecamp thing that we started talking about 8 or 9 years ago was a big deal.
Yeah.
And in my head, at like a real simple level, it's a little bit more nuanced than this. At a real simple level, we really talked about, like, in an early stage transformation, you're operating within the constraints of the existing org. Mm-hmm. Right? You have to. On the other extreme, Basecamp 5, I would love to have an organization full of small Agile teams that were making decisions close to the customer and everything was totally emergent.
Right.
But there's conditions that have to be created within the organization for that level of trust to be exhibited.
Yep.
There's an influence game with your customers. They have to trust that you're going to do what you say and provide value. and they have to trust that the system's going to work for them.
Yeah.
And you can't, more often than not, in anything of non-trivial size, you can't go straight to the end. And I think a lot of us, even our consultants sometimes, we see so clearly what is possible.
Right.
We want to go straight to what's possible. And our whole methodology is around meeting the organization where it is and helping everybody win. And so
in a sustainable way, like so that you're not going to injure yourself. We haven't talked about running in a while, but you're
that's because I don't run much anymore. So.
But you're not just going to go run a marathon. You're going to help them go at a slower pace, but more intentional pace to get there.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about one other thing with this. So one of the things that came to mind in talking about how we're analyzing the different people in the org chart and trying to understand them and create educated hypotheses about them. It's a thing that I always play back in my head whenever I run across somebody in an organization. I'm like, they're the enemy, like they're the problem. Then I stop and I remember, okay, you could retell the entire story of Star Wars and make Darth Vader the hero because he, in his mind, he's the good guy, right? So
you want to hear? You want to pull a funny thread? Okay, so Disney had this experience. I want to say it was called the Galactic Star Cruiser.
Okay,
they'd invested a tremendous amount of money into this thing. It's stupid expensive to go. And it's not the kind of thing you do all the time, right? So you don't go to Galactic Star Cruiser every year. It's like a cruise. The metaphor of it is like a cruise that you're doing in space.
Okay,
it's really neat. It was a really cool experience. I took my brother and his son and a friend of mine there last year, right before it closed. So I was really glad we got the experience. But to your point, the whole thing is like there's this whole story woven in, and the Star Cruiser gets boarded by it's not the Empire anymore, or the First Order, right? So the First Order. And
this is when you guys were dressed up like Star Wars.
Yeah. Like we did cosplay the whole thing, right? It was crazy. But to your point, what was really, really cool is that the way they played it, it's like participants like us, legitimately sided with the rebellion or the First Order, but everybody did it for good reasons.
Yeah.
Everybody did it because they thought they were right.
Yeah.
And it had some kind of funny political overtones and different things that were interesting. But it actually made your point, right?
Yeah.
Like nobody thinks they're evil. Yeah. Even people that are on the evil side.
Everybody's the hero in their own movie.
Everybody thinks they're the hero in their story, right? And so if you don't have alignment between like the development organization and the PMO and the business, like everybody's doing what they think is right to be able to solve that problem.
And what the system is telling them is the right thing to do.
Well, yeah, right. It's like if I'm the CIO and I have fiduciary responsibility to my CEO to take these dollars and get a return, and the dev organization can't like give me any assurance of that, and so a PMO comes in and it does what a PMO does. Now,
makes assurances, right or wrong.
Again, it's like we would love every business to operate in an emergent, exploratory way with their customers, and to some degree, right? That is the goal in a lot of organizations. But the challenge is that especially in a low trust early stage transformation where the conditions are not in place to be able to make and meet those kinds of commitments, or to be able to telegraph progress, or to be able to educate the organization on how to manage trade-offs, how to simplify, right? How to put minimally viable products in the market. Then what happens is that you have players in the organization that are doing what they believe is right, but they're at odds with each other.
Right.
And so this exercise that we were going through with this particular client is we were looking at all the stakeholders. We're literally developing like personas and creating almost like persona level like business canvases kind of a thing, and really looking through like how does each person become a hero in their own story? And I was telling a lot of books. Like there's a book I read in my 20s called Pillars of the Earth by a guy named Ken Follett. It just made an impression on me. I haven't read it in 30 years or something, but really made an impression on me. And I just recently attempted, I didn't get through it, like East of Eden. And what I was talking about is like sometimes these big epic novels, they start off with like 10 threads.
Yeah.
And everybody's
like
doing
Stephen
their
King
thing.
book,
And then then over time, they all start weaving together into an integrated narrative. And that was the metaphor I was using with the team. It's like, if we deeply understood the needs of all these players and we could articulate a system of delivery and a transformation plan and a way of interacting where everybody won, like what would that story look like? How would it progress over the next year or two? Like, what would be the narrative? Like, if I were going to make a movie out of it, what would be the storyline?
Yeah.
What would be the arc, crescendo, right? The resolution. And so that's how I was trying to get everybody to think. And what's fascinating is that everybody understands this on some level, right? And I think a lot of people do it intuitively. But when you have, let's say you're the leader of a transformation office or something inside your company, it's like certain things that you think are intuitive aren't necessarily intuitive
Yes.
to all the people you're working with. They're just not, right? And it's so human nature to, we tend to be tribal and we tend to locally optimize and we tend to think about our stuff and we're the good guys and all the things we talked about.
Right.
And so we're just going through a really intentional exercise of taking all the stakeholders, understanding their story and what they need to win in their story.
With whatever data we have, or whatever information you have.
With whatever, right? And how do we, through our system of delivery, through our transformation models, through our change management tools, like how do we weave a narrative of transformation and change where we don't have to demonize anybody and we don't have to make anybody else the bad guy.
Yeah.
And I get it, right? Some people don't operate from a good place, and that's true, right? And sometimes that's the reality. But to assume that out of the gate, I think is dangerous. I think people are generally trying to do what they think is the right thing for their company.
So I had this teacher one time who said to me that I was complaining about the people that shop at Walmart in their pajamas at like 4:00 in the afternoon.
Or Walmart people, yeah.
And she said, you have to remember that every person you meet is doing the very best they can with every single moment. So like even the person, like they might look like they have bad intentions for whatever their conditions are. We don't know their story. They're making the best possible choice. But it's hard to remember that.
Yeah, and especially when you're trying to lead people to change. Right? And you're trying to get them to do something that's different and uncomfortable. They're trying to operate in a new way. I had this really powerful experience. My last corporate job, before I went to go work for Version 1, I worked in an ecosystem with this lady. I'm sure I've shared this over the years. And it was interesting. And this is probably somewhat made up, but it was a cool storyline. And she's just so difficult to get her to change, right? Her priorities were different. She had become a VP over 25 years, doing a bunch of stuff. And in my head at the time, I was probably all of like 35 at the time. And in my head, she was just evil and resistant and difficult and just awful. She was just awful, right?
Yeah.
And she kind of was, right? But I actually somehow found out that I had a really good buddy from a previous job that lived next door to her. And I don't know how it came up, but I heard something about her story. And it was like, and this is an example I use all the time. I have a few other ones, but this is like my favorite. And I learned, I didn't know anything about her personally, but like, she was a primary breadwinner in the family. Her husband was an entrepreneur, is kind of uneven, right? His business hadn't really taken off. She lived in a really nice house in a really nice neighborhood, had kids in college. And I just had this moment of realization that when I was suggesting that she change, what I was doing is I wasn't threatening her life, right? And because I was asking her after 25 years to do something that she might not be great at, and it might risk her position or it might expose her or something. And in that moment, it just gave me just a new empathetic lens on why people show up the way they do. And they're usually not stupid. Sometimes they're usually not stupid and they're usually not evil. And so sometimes if you can,
and we don't know what they're responding to, what trauma they're responding to when they act.
Sure. I didn't even get into like trauma and identity issues and ego and sense of self. Right? And that's a whole nother level of exploration. But yeah, right. So it's like when you approach it from the standpoint, everybody's trying to do the best they can do, and they have all these drivers that you're probably never going to be exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just a really big believer in, and this is what we're trying to like codify, right? It's like we do it, but we're trying to codify it into a methodology and into an approach where we create a shared understanding of that ecosystem of human beings. Mm-hmm. And when we approach and make recommendations, we do it in a way. Now, you might say, well, is that disingenuous, Mike? Because, at the end of the day, we're not going to need a PMO. Maybe, maybe not, right? It depends upon the complexity of the organization. But here's the offer, right? There's not a human being in the world in a PMO that wants to run around and chase after people for status reports, ask them the percent completes, put red all over. I just don't think, maybe I'm sure
one
exists,
guy.
Right? But like what I'll tell people sometimes is like, just imagine a world where your interactions with the dev team were healthy. Mm-hmm. They were able to do what they said they were going to do. The reports that you put together were actually accurate. They actually gave the executives the ability to make the trade-offs that they need to make. We were able to establish the reporting requirements. We were able to educate them over time on a new way of operating that gives business more ability to be successful. Like if we could create that, like what might that free you up to do? You're not chasing down people and doing estimates and mind numbing, like just all the stuff that I would say project management
is a challenge too, right? Because it's the same thing with Scrum Masters. If the team is delivering, what the hell is a Scrum Master supposed to do? And my response is like, that's when you really have to dig in and figure out how to add the value.
Well, yeah. So organizations are never perfect, right? I mean, there's always something to solve.
Yeah.
And so what the offer that I make to people, and we're kind of in this specific context, right? But the offer that you make to that group is like, how could you operate more strategically? How could you add more value? Mm-hmm. Because it's really difficult to do like pure play Scrum across an entire organization. I mean, you have infrastructure and you have the business and you have marketing plans and you have all kinds of different stuff. Like I would rather operate in a world where product development was like a machine, mm-hmm. Delivering against release plans and roadmaps and able to stabilize velocity and make and meet commitments within constraints and make appropriate trade-offs and all these different things. And then like take the product delivery organization just out of the equation. Mm-hmm. And now let's project management, the synchronization of all the other parts of the organization. Right? I mean, that would be a more strategic view of it. And again, I've said for years, it's like Scrum did away with project managers, but it didn't do away with project management. It just redistributed it, right? So project management, I believe, is essential. I think understanding how to do project management is essential. Yeah. Do I need a scorekeeper running around checking boxes and making sure deliverables are produced?
Not so much.
Like there's different ways of accomplishing that achieve the same goal, right? Yeah. But again, and again, sometimes with us, usually we have a broad enough span of influence and control that, we're not just operating with just the dev team, but occasionally we are. And so it's easy to align with your customer to see the world the way they see it. Yeah. Or if I'm in a PMO or in a transformation office internally, it's easy to see the world through my lens. But again, I always go back to some of the Covey stuff. It's like, I'm a huge believer, and it's like we have to be able to think win-win. We have to. Okay. We have to create an environment where everybody gets to be the hero in their own story.
So I want to ask you, this was something that came up on the call that you kind of started to talk about, and then the topic changed. Just to lay some of this stuff out for people. So we're going to form hypotheses about who the individuals are. We're going to test those as we get to work with them to try to see mm-hmm. how close we are off the mark. And as this thing evolves, we're going to be able to realize there's going to be a point when this person is going to feel an incredible amount of tension or stress because we've changed something that just upsets their whole apple cart. And the thing that I wanted to ask you about towards the win-win side is, would we be able to go to that person and say, listen, there's going to be this moment later on where you're going to want to like set us on fire. And when you want to do that, here's why that's happening. And here's what comes after that. Because then you could show them the future state where the tension is resolved and how we get to win-win. Do you think that would be a way to create safety for them?
It's probably not the lens that I would take.
Okay.
It's probably not the perspective I would take by default, right? What I would look for is I would want to deeply, and again, we're just using the PMO and the dev team as a common example, right? It happens across between the product organization, the dev teams, aspects of the business, or DevOps, and in delivery, or security and delivery, and it's all over the place, right? So the offer that I would want to make is I want to deeply understand the actual problem that group is trying to solve, like the questions that they need to answer.
What the PMO's purpose is.
Yeah, and what I would offer is a better, more efficient way to get them what they need. Because when they ask for status reports, or they ask for documents, or ask for percent completes, or ask for regular agreements, those things are proxies for what they need. That's the only thing that's available for them to ask that gets them the ability to answer the questions they need to answer. Yeah. And if I can offer them an alternative way to get the questions that's actually easier for them and creates alignment in the organization. Yeah. Like I would like to be in a place where I'm communicating gain rather than loss. Okay. Like I'd rather say, you got my reference, right? Yeah, I'd rather, So what Dave was just referencing was
that was a long time ago.
A lot of times in Agile, what we do is we tell people, we walk into we say we're going to do Agile, and we're going to be able to tell you all the things we can't do. Yeah. And it's like, that's language of loss, right? Who wants to sign up for, well, just out of the gate, I'm getting less than I want. But if we can tell a story that's how do I get more of what I want more effectively? Yeah. And sometimes there's a trade-off there, right? And sometimes it's like, I get all of the top level objectives, but I make some trade-offs in the small. It's the whole minimally viable product thing, right? Like I get to be in market, I get to sell, I get to do all the different things I need to do to satisfy my customers, but I'm making some trade-offs in the small over time to get more of what I want in the large. Okay. And that's a language of gain. And so with most people, what I want to try to do is I want to create a language of gain where I offer them a better way to get more of what they want. It might be a different way. It might create a little bit of discomfort. That's probably fair, right? Change always is a little uncomfortable. Right. But if I can show them clearly how through the operating model, through the transformation, through all these things that they can see that path. Yeah. It's a different story, right? So that would be the angle that I would attempt to approach it from. All
right, I'm gonna just say this because it's stuck in my head from what you were saying. Okay. So if this was the movie Taken, and your daughter's being kidnapped, wow, okay. Instead of you as Liam Neeson saying you're going to get taken, you're going to say you're going to get rescued.
Wow. I that's a big context jump there, Dave.
Well, maybe. Yeah, we can cut that part out.
Okay. Keep it in. Keep it in. That's what makes these conversations fun.
Rather, because the thing I was wondering, like, would I say to the PMO, you're going to get to a point where you're all going to feel like your jobs are disappearing or you can't do your jobs. And rather than that, talk to them about what is their mission.
Yeah, let me rephrase that. So their jobs are going to they're going to feel like their jobs are going away. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, so if I have a system that is so well run that it makes their job easier, then what that does is that frees them up to do more strategic things.
All right. Perfect.
Right?
Great example.
Think about testers, right? If I was a testing organization, would I want the organization to produce more defects and more remediation opportunities so that I always had things to test? Or would you rather create defect-free software that didn't require that kind of testing? That's the whole play behind automation, right? You're still going to need people that set up automation, and you're still going to need validation, and you're still going to need like all of that mechanism. You're still going to need to have assurance. Where the rubber meets the road is like, will I need the same number of project managers? Will I need the same number of testers? Like, probably not. Okay. Right. But it's in the best interest of the organization to have defect-free software than it does to have armies of testers and rework and delays and all those things. Right. So it's tough, right? And I mean, there are times where an organization gets good enough at what they're doing where they don't need the orchestrators. But I'll tell you, here's the other side. You've been around long enough to know this. I can remember and this is like 53, this is like 25-year-old stuff. Like I remember when we would like plan high level projects back in the day, what would he say? Like, for every 6 devs, you need 2 testers, 1 business analyst, something like that. Well, it's like that's flipped at this point in some places. I mean, like the ratio of people that do requirements identification and testing to the actual number of developers in some organizations, it's
probably because they had it the other way before and they have so much technical debt to suffer through now.
Well, sure, right? And so, in the face of a organization that is out of control, but you have to have visibility, what else do you do other than assign project managers to it? Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't think testing goes away. I don't think product management goes away. I don't think project management goes away. But I do think there's opportunities to flip the ratios and change the world around it.
Okay.
And that's in the best interest of the organization as a whole. And, but I get that there's human stuff, right? But so you're still looking for win-win situations in these organizations where everybody gets a shot to win.
And at the individual level, we would be trying to understand who is this person? What do they need for their job? What do they need from a personal success level? And create as much as possible opportunities for them to succeed as best they can within the context of all the other storylines that are running within this epic that you're telling.
Yeah. So like, here's the thing. So whether it be a testing organization or a business analyst organization or any other PMO, it's like I think on some level we can all agree that we want the system to be rational and we want the system to work. Mm-hmm. And the organization ultimately gets to decide, do they want to redeploy those human beings into other more higher value areas?
Yeah.
That's the ideal. Do they want to decide to continue to invest in that capability? That's the ideal. But it's like, I think if you're smart and you respect the people in the system and you try to help them win, like my job, leading Agile's job, is to optimize that system so your organization can produce software in a reliable, structured way. The business or the leaders of that organization then can decide how to best deploy their resources. And by resources, I mean dollars. Mm-hmm. But sometimes those dollars are used to hire people, right? Okay. And so I'm being really careful here. Right? I don't want to call people resources, right? I know my audience, right? But it's like I'm not saying that everybody gets to sit in the same seat that they sat in on the end of this, right? But then that's up to the organization to decide.
Okay.
I think it would not be healthy to say, well, but I know organizations are like this. We want to preserve everybody's job as is. Yeah. You get into unionized environments, and that's really a difficult thing, right? Because it's like, you just can't change people's jobs or redeploy them or sometimes even let them go. It's complicated.
Okay. I want to test something about this.
Okay.
You're talking about it from a consulting standpoint, understanding all the pieces to re-engineer the organization. I'm thinking about it because when I did it, I was like embedded at a company, ran the PMO at a company, and I'm thinking about the executive leadership, and I'm trying to understand this about all them too, so I can figure out how to position things. And it's very much about social engineering for me at that point, but not in a negative way. It's just creating opportunities. I just want to see if you can react to that at that individual level.
Yeah. So so it's interesting, right? So where I sit today, CEO, leading Agile, people call us that are interested in doing this, right? Mm-hmm. And so the people that end up hiring us have bought into our methodology and our strategy, and they want to do it this way, right? And we usually have span of control in the organization and access to the right leaders and can make the case and can make the changes that need to be made, right? If I'm on the PMO side, it gets dicey, right? Because like the last time I was in that kind of a job, I had really good alignment with my boss and his boss and his boss, and I was operating. But to my earlier story about that person who lived next to my neighbor, we didn't have span of control over other parts of the organization. Right. And for me personally, I can be somewhat of an idealist, right, and a pragmatic idealist. But I was trying to do the right thing. But I was also young enough at that point, not mature enough in my career that I didn't really realize how to do all the stakeholder management. I didn't have all the messaging and storytelling, and hadn't done 50, podcasts with you.
Were you young enough to know that your right thing was the one true right thing, or old enough to know that there is no one true right thing?
Well, we were pretty pragmatic at the time. Like we weren't pulling the Scrum books and the XP books and saying, thou shalt do this by the book, right? I mean, we were inventing methodology really, we were really inventing the leading Agile methodology back then. And we were pulling out a lot of David Anderson's lean stuff and going through and reading the Eli Goldrat stuff. And we were working with our governance things. And we thought we had a pretty good model. And that model has since played out very well over the last 14 years for us and for our clients. So I was probably arrogant enough to think that I was right, and bold enough and fearless enough to where I wasn't worried about pissing people off. But I was also naive enough at that age to think that if we pushed hard enough, we'd win. I didn't really realize, the implications of building relationships and alliances during that time. So it's cool, right? I mean, it's like, I don't stay 35 forever, right? At this point. Yeah, for sure. Right. And so, yeah. Right. So there's a little bit of, there's give and take. And, one of the things that, is part of our DNA as a company is this recognize that change is a process. And it's incremental and iterative over time. And I think that maybe gets into a little bit of what, I'm coaching in our organization and trying to instantiate via methodology is just a really broad sense that, especially in the early stages, if we can't tell a story about how everybody wins and where they fit in and how they become the hero and how they're able to do their jobs better, inevitably it requires some level of change. It's going to be different. But there's a difference between saying, I'm going to get you so much quality information that you can do your job as a PMO reliably, safely. It might be different, so it's not totally risk-free. But you connect that dot and you say, I remember back in the day, it was like, we'd get these fire drills and it's like, oh, well, we need to see percent complete. I could pull backlog data. I could pull our roadmaps. I could pull this. I could understand our earned value. And we were doing pure play Agile metrics at that time. And I could do that in hours, where most everybody else was spending weeks trying to pull together all the information because it was all manufactured, right? And it wasn't right.
Well, also because you understood project management and you understood Agile.
Yeah, it kind of helps. Well, again, right? Making my point here a little bit. It's like, because I understand project management, because I understood Agile, and because I understood the needs of the product organization, I understood the needs of the business and the IT infrastructure. Because I understood all those things, you can start to craft solutions where everybody wins, right? If you only know one slice of it and you don't know, because again, like I'm telling you, it's like project management is a thing. Managing time, cost, and scope is a thing. It's very, very few environments that don't have deadlines, that have just open pocketbooks, right? And I would suggest the ones that do, that can experiment like that, have something that causes them to print money. And they're operating and doing all these other things as a way to extend the game and add value and grow and do different things. Like, it's way easier for me to experiment and to do things open-ended when we're flush with cash and nobody's on the bench and everything's like doing really good. When you're operating within tight constraints and everything matters, it's really, really difficult to let go of control because the cost of failure is higher. Right. So much of this is driven by the economics of the company that you're working in and what they're trying to achieve. And
this is going to be something that could be fairly time consuming, should involve more than one person before you go out and test these hypotheses. Right. So it's not just you. It's not just you sitting by yourself in a room looking at the org chart saying, oh, this person's this and this person's this.
No, like what we're hypothesizing for this one particular group that I was talking to, it's like we're doing so a little bit. Some people might not know about leading Agile is that as we've grown over the last couple of years, we invested in a studio, And so probably a third of my team are technical at this point. And as things evolve in the marketplace, we're becoming much more of a technology forward organization. So you hear us talking about cloud and optimizing cloud costs and product modernization, things that would historically been in that area of Basecamp 3 for us. Right. So we've been building that organization for a few years, and it's starting to take off, which is pretty cool. We're doing some really neat stuff in that space. So we have a few clients that I would say are technology first clients, and we have a few clients that are process first clients. Okay. And so this particular client that we were using as a case study is a more technology first client for us. Okay. And we're talking with their leadership team about doing some transformation work, because we're in the middle of doing a lot of this modernization and security stuff, and hitting all of the challenges of a non-transformed organization. Okay. So we're in that organization, we know the players. And so what I'm encouraging the team to do is to develop these hypotheses. And then how do we work with our primary stakeholders to begin to validate them? And then how do we actually work with all of the other adjacent parts to bring them in? And then how do we communicate a vision for them where everybody wins? And to do that, like what I'm really trying to do is to take this particular team and really get them to have empathy. Most directors of development have similar kinds of problems. People that do security, similar kinds of problems. People that do release management, similar kinds of problems. Yeah. Unique business drivers, unique traumas, unique situations, all those different things. So you have to validate over time, but we might not know some nuance, but we know a lot. Because it's just not all that different company.
And even if the hypothesis is wrong, that's very valuable in itself, because it shows you like, oh, this person isn't who we thought. I mean, there was one example of a person that you did a color code test on that you had profiled a certain way, and the test showed them to be the total opposite. And it was all because of the context of their relationship with their boss.
Yeah. So there's that was who that person was. So for anybody who maybe doesn't listen to every single thing Dave and I talk about, we do a lot with personality profiling inside Leading Agile, and we do it with our clients sometimes. We profile everybody internally. And there's a few standard things we do, and then there's some things that we use internally that we don't use for hiring and we don't use with clients, like Enneagram and Berkman and a few other things. But there's one thing I just really like. It's based upon the same science and technology as the DISC. It's called Color Code, and I got turned on to it about 5 years ago. And it measures everybody, whether logical, emotional, controlling, or non-controlling. And little fun fact is, whenever I'm interested in doing something, I profile everybody around me that will submit to a test for me, right? So my wife, my kids, my leadership team, things like that. And I look at it and I go, does that help me understand the people that I know better? And I had this funny moment, and all the women listening to us will probably laugh, but my wife and I are opposites, like literally exact opposites on almost every personality profile we do. I had my wife do an Enneagram the other day, and she was laughing while she took it. She goes, I just know I'm answering every question the exact opposite of how you would answer this question, right? We have enough self-awareness after 30 years, right? Yeah. And so anyway, my wife is, red is logically controlling. That's me, like 75%. She's emotionally controlling, and that's like power is logical controlling. Like intimacy and connection is emotional controlling. Like I demand in my relationships to feel good and to feel connected. And then there's logically non-controlling and emotionally non-controlling. Right. So logically non-controlling is like following the rules. And emotional non-controlling is like having fun, right? So I'm red, yellow, my wife's blue, white. And, to survive with me over the last 30 years, or at that point, 25, she knows that she just had come to the conclusion she can't lead with emotional arguments. And it's like I had it convinced in my head that my wife was logically non-controlling. And she is to a point, but she's more dominant, emotionally non-controlling. And what she does to trick me, I know she doesn't do it on purpose, but she tricks me all the time. I'm better at figuring it out now, is that she'll have emotional conversations with me through a logical lens, right? So she's leading with facts and things like she thinks I want to hear, but I have to go, oh, wait, we're having an emotional conversation. and that's a really interesting dynamic. And so when we first started to do this and I started to have these light bulbs go off, I'm like, oh, this is why I've been kind of messing things up for the last 25 years. Like there's sometimes I'd literally stop, like I'd go down the path and I'd be like, oh, wait. Oh, we're having an emotional conversation. I'm sorry, I totally missed it. And then I would literally like flip my brain and I'd start listening through an emotional lens, right? So we have, So your story is we had a client that I think everybody on that account would have said was incredibly logically controlling. And then we did a personality assessment on him, and he was incredibly emotionally controlling. So he was using logic and frames and rules, and like it was really, really, kind of difficult situation to work through. But what he was really trying to do was to protect the people around him, And so it was a very powerful realization with that team when we realized that, okay, what was he really trying to accomplish?
Achieve, yeah.
Right? So one of the threads that we pulled is just like, where would, personality profiling play into this? And, could we make an educated guess on somebody's, profile to kind of start to decide? And, when you start working with people, sometimes they'll be willing to take that test, and it gives you a lot of information. Yeah. But like when I started realizing that my wife wasn't, going through all this logical stuff to convince me, she was going through all this logical stuff to communicate an emotional concern about the kids or her parents or me or something like that. Yeah. Just light bulbs go off. And so it just drives home the point that, again, you mentioned it's trauma and it's upbringing and it's personality and it's experience and it's role and it's, are you under stress or are you under duress? What am I trying to solve organizationally? Yeah. And the more empathy we can have for our stakeholders, the more we can understand what they want and put them in a position to win. And we get the changes we want, we get the organizational characteristics we want, but then they get what they need to be successful in their job. It's just way better than trying to marginalize people and label them as difficult or resistant to change or command and control or whatever.
Force them into a different space.
But you can't usually force people, right? So you end up at war with them. Right? You end up at war with them. And I'll tell you as a consultant, those are the worst situations to be in, is when we have stakeholders that have chosen sides, and it just makes everybody's job harder when we don't approach each other with sufficient empathy and understanding.
And that's my chance to plug The Art of War, which says that the best battles are the ones that you win without ever fighting. So everything that Mike's talking about, if you're anybody who's read The Art of War, all of this ties directly back into that book and understanding the person you're negotiating with as well as yourself, so that you can create the opportunities for people to achieve what they need to achieve.
So what I think is fascinating is that somehow what I've also found is I'm very Jungian, Carl Jung, in my thinking about things. It's interesting how you get influenced by things without having directly experienced them. So I've never read a Carl Jung book, but apparently like everything I think about is right within his school of thought. And so Dave kindly sent me a Kindle copy of that book. And so that'll be my homework is to read
I think you're going to enjoy it a lot.
Yeah. I started reading like the introduction while I was on the plane this morning. So
all right.
It's cool.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I always appreciate these conversations. And it's funny. I guess people probably have this figured out by now. I have no idea where these are going to go.
Yeah, I wasn't sure with this. I did have a note not to bring up color coding, and I did it anyway. So.
Well. Yeah. As long as we weren't talking about specific clients or accounts or naming names.
I think we did pretty good.
I think we did pretty good too. Yeah, pretty good.
Cool.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, thank you for doing this.